Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another school year. I know it's a difficult transition, but we're welcoming you back with a smile and a warm greeting. My name is Holly Bell. I am the Student and Family Rights Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education, which also includes Section 504. So if you have any questions about 504, I am the person to come to, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And today we're going to talk about your responsibilities. I know there are some new coordinators out there, and this can feel a little overwhelming to take on this responsibility. So we want to make sure that you feel prepared. And for those of you who have been a coordinator, we want to remind you of some of the duties that you have as a Section 504 coordinator. And this will be a recording that you can access and share indefinitely after we post it today. So I want to remind you of some of the duty. I can hear myself. I can hear myself on YouTube. So we've got YouTube going, and the chat should be open on YouTube. So you can ask questions. I have my lovely assistant, Sid Tesh here, who is going to raise her hand and let us know if you have questions. But please know that on YouTube, there is a slight delay. That might be why I just heard my voice echoed back to me. So you can ask any questions. As far as getting the 1.5 relicensure points for this webinar, I am going to be sending out a Google form link for you to fill out, and that will be through my listserv. So if you got this information not from me for this webinar, through the listserv, then you can sign up for the listserv, and I will have that link at the end, or you can email me and I will send you the Google link. You'll have 1 month to fill it out. It has just your demographic information and then also about 5 questions about the content. And then we will issue you the 1.5 relicensure points. So you can have 1 month to fill it out, and you can share it amongst the others who might. I'm going to share the link for the YouTube video so that if someone was not able to attend today, then they can watch the recording within the month and fill out that form. So with that, I'm going to get started, and I want to introduce my co-facilitator, my co-presenter today. Dory, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Dory Clough. I work for Davis School District. I'm the District 504 coordinator, and I've been doing this for almost 5 years now. And Holly has saved my bacon a lot of times, just being able to answer questions that I've had. And she's always very quick and responsive. So I love that. So when she asked me to do this, I felt like I kind of needed to, because I'm always asking her questions.
Well, I asked you because you're well informed and you're a great coordinator. So thank you for helping me out today. It's hard for people to listen to me for an hour and a half. I can't even listen to myself for an hour and a half. So let's move on. So here are our learning intentions for today. You will be provided with an overview of the scope and responsibility for the LEA coordinator and building level coordinator, which we'll talk about the differences. Learners will receive information regarding the legal requirements under Section 504 in relation to your role as coordinator. You'll be introduced to policies and procedures that align with Section 504 regulations, and you'll be provided with resources to assist you in your efforts to fulfill your responsibilities. All right, so this is a legal requirement. This is not a choice. Well, if you're receiving federal financial assistance, each LEA has to have a 504 coordinator. An LEA means a district or a charter school. So we're not talking about individual schools. So when we're talking about building coordinators, that is not a legal requirement. It definitely makes life easier to have a point person who is overseeing some of the responsibilities at the building level. But Dory is the Section 504 coordinator for Davis School District. That is the only legal requirement for Davis School District. And so that applies for each LEA in the state. So I just want to make sure that that is clarified. Now, who can be the Section 504 coordinator? The regulations, which pre-K through 12 regulations are approximately 3 pages. They don't give us a lot. And so what they tell us is that the coordinator needs to be someone who is knowledgeable of the regulations, someone who can fulfill the duties as assigned. So I often recommend that that would be best served by an administrator, someone who is specially assigned at the district office. If you have a larger LEA, it can be very difficult for teachers in the classroom or part-time aides or counselors. Well, counselors cannot be the coordinator, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Well, actually, we'll cover that now. By law, counselors in the state of Utah cannot serve as the 504 coordinator. And so, Dory, you've got the notes in front of you. Do you want to state which law that is? I have my.
It says House Bill 81 was passed during the 2019 legislative session, which directed the State Board of Education to adopt rules regarding the direct and indirect services provided by school counselors, including the recommended amount of time a school counselor may spend on direct and indirect services, and prohibiting school counselors from certain activities, including serving as the Section 504 coordinator.
So, cannot be the school counselor. But none of this is in the Section 504 federal regulations. They don't say who can be the coordinator, except that they can fulfill the duties that we're going to talk about today. Okay, I had a little chat from Sid there. Now let's talk about the responsibilities of the Section 504 coordinator. I will let you take it right now, Dory.
Okay, so the LEAs can determine additional job requirements, and the Section 504 coordinator is at a minimum responsible for coordinating and monitoring the LEA's compliance for Section 504, as well as state civil rights requirements regarding discrimination and harassment based on disability, overseeing prevention efforts to avoid Section 504 violations from occurring, implementing the LEA's discrimination complaint procedures with respect to allegations of Section 504 violations, discrimination based on disability, and disability harassment, and also investigating complaints alleging violations of Section 504 discrimination based on disability and disability harassment.
Okay, let's stop there. That's a lot to unpack.
Yes, it is.
That's a lot of words. And we want to make sure we're very clear on what those mean and give you some real examples from Dory's experience about how she goes about doing this. So first, coordinating and monitoring the LEA's compliance with Section 504. And there are not a lot of Section 504 specific regulations for the state of Utah. Other states have maybe more fine-tuned it. But, and I see that we've got a question, Sid, so I'll get right to you. But what, so that we have to know what those regulations are, which we have a webinar for that. And so, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. So coordinating and monitoring the LEA's compliance. So Sid, go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll have Dory talk about what that coordination and monitoring looks like.
Okay, perfect. So it looks like we have a question here. Someone is wondering if you can name that House bill again.
Oh, it was, sorry, let me go back. It was House Bill 81.
So that
Perfect,
is the House
thank you.
bill preventing counselors from being assigned as the 504 coordinator. In fact, students can play, or counselors can play a role. They can serve on 504 teams. They can help with some of the, implementation. They might be written onto the 504 plan as far as part of the related services, but they cannot be that coordinator solely responsible under Utah law. Okay, so coordinating and monitoring, Dory.
So a lot of the things that I do is I provide instruction. So like tomorrow I'm going to be providing a training for all of our new 504 coordinators in the district, and anyone that may need a refresher, or a principal that's brand new that may also want a refresher, or to sit there with their intern to find out more about 504, because they haven't, a lot of times our principals haven't done 504s in a while because they tend to give it to their assistant principals or interns. So I usually at the beginning of the year give them a boot camp that goes over all of the information about 504. And then I also cover our district policies and procedures. Then during the school year, I have 3 additional trainings that I provide. And that usually what I try to do is kind of give them upcoming things that they may be looking at. So like in January, I'm talking to them about testing that's going to be coming up and what those accommodations might be provided, and who do you need to talk to, and different things like that. Or at the beginning of the year, I'm talking about making sure that all of the teachers have a copy of the 504 and they understand what accommodations are going to look like in their specific environment, because sometimes a 504 accommodation may look one way in one environment, but very different in another. Making sure that all of the prep time people understand what the 504 accommodations might look like in PE or in computer lab or something like that, depending on what the disability is. So making sure that I'm talking with all of our 504 coordinators and making sure that they're aware of the things that they need to be doing throughout the school year. As far as prevention efforts, that's when we talk about our policies and our procedures, and what is best practice and what is, because 504 is very gray in a lot of areas. And so we don't have those specific timelines like we do in special ed. And so helping our 504 coordinators work through that and understand what exactly is required and what they need to be doing as the year goes on. Or sometimes I will get a phone call from a parent, and maybe that teacher doesn't understand some of the accommodations that can be provided. So I jump on USB-E, I get that PowerPoint or video that Holly has, and I send it to the school and say, hey, sit down and review this, and this will help you kind of work through some of those problems. You always want to make sure that you're talking about documentation and different things that you want to provide, and make sure that those 504 accommodations are looked at and reviewed even before school starts.
Okay, so let's pause for a second. Sid's going to ask us a question. So I can see where the trainings that you do could be very preventative if you're doing those on a regular basis. I know that's something that you've done annually. Do you do that on a both district-wide? I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about training later, but that I can see that being preventative. But I want to go back to how you're monitoring compliance. Like how are you making sure that all of your schools are in compliance with Section 504? Sid, what's your question?
Okay, so we have 2 here in the chat. So the first question is, 3 now. So the first question is a 504 coordinator the same as a file holder? Do you need clarification?
I don't know what a file holder is as far as a human person, a position for a person. I don't know. I'm guessing a file holder is kind of akin to special education. Like I'm thinking that's the line of thinking, is that there are file holders in special education. So as far as who houses the documents for 504, that wouldn't necessarily be something that is delineated in the regulations, but it would make sense for a person to have the documents, one person. But Dory, you can talk a little about what documents that you keep. But then they need to make sure that those documents are shared with the appropriate individuals, because FERPA law applies to all of those documents so that they're shared. So to stay organized, I think it would make sense to have a coordinator be the central hub of documentation and making sure that they are disseminated to the right people.
Now, do
Do
they
you have
mean a
anything to add,
registrar?
Lori?
Do they mean like a registrar? Like a lot of times in the high schools they have, or in the junior highs, they have a certain secretary that is like the file keeper. Is that what they're talking about?
I'm not sure. It just says file holder. If you'd like, I can ask for some clarification on that one.
Well, they might throw something in there. Let's go to the
Yeah.
other two and they might throw something in.
Okay, there are three now, three more. So the first one says, when Dory talks about what she teaches, is it only for her district or available for charters as well?
This is something that I've just created for my district. It's basically going over the law and sectioning it out and kind of covering those some of the specifics maybe that have come up within our district where parents have had questions and wanted some clarification. And then when I go to the schools and talk to them, maybe they seem a little fuzzy about it, or I have schools that will call me with a question. So then if they've got a question, my philosophy is they're usually not the only one with that question, that other people potentially have that question. And so I'll make a PowerPoint that just kind of specifically talks about that. Some of our big ones are like participation in extracurricular activities, diabetes. The newest one has been anxiety and not knowing exactly what type of accommodations they can provide for students with anxiety. And so my trainings are really based off what feedback I'm getting from the LEAs or the 504 coordinators in the school.
Well, and Dory, I think one of the things that you've used some of my materials to build some of your trainings, right? Mm-hmm. So just so you know, available to you on our website there's one that's a foundations video, and Dory's helped us create a new one. I'm waiting on some edits for that. And then of course, the regulations are going to change next year. So ta-da. So that'll be fun. But I don't think they'll change that much, just hopefully add some to this muddy water that we've all been swimming around with since 2008. So and so I've got the foundations video, and I've got and I'll share any of the slides like Dory's saying, with things that are commonly coming up for you. You can use my slides and then add your own content. But as this is saying, my connection is unstable, so please let me know if I start to cut out. And let's see, anxiety, diabetes, ADHD, dyslexia, post-secondary, transition. What other, am I missing any that I've done?
I was just looking at it today and I can't remember.
So those are all available, and anxiety. So these are all webinars that we've done over the years. And in fact, I'm building out a Canvas course, which is basically done. And so you could watch them all and actually get USB-E credit. So not just relicensure points. So we're trying to get that finished up. So you could do that as well. So you could watch all of them and get credit for it. And so I can send you any of those slides and you can adapt them to your own LEA. Other questions, Ed?
Okay, so the next question here, does House Bill 81 include counselors not being the 504 building coordinator as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they should not be coordinating the 504 program in any setting. Like I said, they can take part in the 504 team, which in many circumstances, the reason we created the videos that we did about anxiety and, some of the real mental health challenges that our students are facing right now really need related services with counselors. And so they will take, they can be written into a 504 plan. And yes, I am saying related services. That is the way that's the terminology in the part of Section 504 regulations that govern pre-K through 12. So special education and related services, it never says accommodations. That is other subparts in 504 law that we have borrowed. So if you didn't know that little bit of trivia, under subpart D, it just says special education and related services, but we put accommodations in as well. So just because we want to confuse everyone. And so they should be written into the plan when appropriate, when the team decides that. But they should not be the one who's in charge of coordinating all the meetings and writing up all the plans and creating all the paperwork and disseminating all the plans and making sure that they're being adhered to. And that's not their role.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question I have is, what is the best practice for documentation, data collection, progress monitoring look like, and what data is required to be collected?
So we're going to get there.
Okay.
We're going to
Okay.
get there.
So that one's a wait.
Yep, we've got that on the docket.
Okay. And then the last thing I have is a follow-up from the file holder question. The one that asked about is the 504 coordinator the same as a file holder? So they followed up with this. In our charter, it's the person who has the files and runs the meetings. That's in addition to our principal/vice principal and general education teacher. I guess my question is the coordinator the same person who runs the meeting and writes up the 504 plan?
Yes.
Okay.
That was okay. Ask for clarification. That helped. So Dory, I do want to ask how you're kind of monitoring that.
So as far as monitoring the compliance, I kind of go off just more my instruction and kind of telling them how they should do it. And then when they're doing them, I can kind of go back and look and see if randomly picking through them and then going back to that school and the coordinator and saying, I noticed in this one, just because I happen to be looking, that you have this or this, and how are you doing that? And what does that look like? Because to me, this is maybe isn't very self-explanatory. And if it were to go to a different school, they really wouldn't know what to do with this. So some of it is that. Some of it is when a parent calls and asks a question, I'm pulling up their 504 and looking at it. And when I look at it, I can see if there's things that may potentially need to be changed or may needed to be revisited. I know sometimes, like ours says, the law says you should review it every year. I know that sometimes isn't being done. And so if I find that out, I'm like, you guys really need to review that. That's part of our law, and we revisit that law.
Were you the one that had the little checklist that was like, I have this in place, I have this in place, the little checklist? So that might be something that you could do as far as monitoring compliance. You could have a checklist for your individual schools. So the coordinator could send out a little checklist survey type of thing for your schools to check off, like, yes, I have done X, Y, and Z. So it might not be that specifically that checklist that might be just for coordinators. That's like, I've done this and this, but you could put something together for and I could see if I could find some kind of a checklist that would be something you could disseminate to your schools and say, hey, are you doing this, this, and this? So that's something, if you don't have that, we can maybe work on that. That could be helpful for monitoring and being proactive in that way. Mm-hmm. Any other prevention efforts that you've got going on? I think that training is probably the best way to go about it if you're doing regular trainings.
Yeah. And I think too, with the checklist, I think we do have that on one of our later slides that, or that they can access, that I kind of wrote down by month, things that you should be looking at within your 504s, and what you should be doing in the school to kind of prepare. And I think that kind of helps a lot, because like, I think at the very beginning of the school year, I say, make sure everybody has a copy, make sure that everybody understands what that looks like, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you could kind of adapt that maybe for your buildings. I am going to send those out on the listserv afterwards. I will be sending out those documents that you shared. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about grievance procedures with allegations a little bit later. And then investigating, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I know that's your favorite part of the job, Dory.
Oh, yes. Okay, so to develop a systematic process for monitoring both LEA and building level compliance for Section 4 requirements, including but not limited to child find responsibilities, which was Holly asked me, so what do you guys do for child find in Davis School District? And I was like, let me check. I know when I was in a school as a school principal, we kind of posted it out and made sure that the cities posted it in their bulletins and things like that. But I had called our special ed department and she says, well, we have it on our website and I know that we have it other places and it has to be sent out. But I was like, do we have it in homeless shelters? Holly mentioned homeless shelters. We probably should do that. And so it was one of those really great things where we kind of talked about it a little bit more. And I was like, yeah, we probably need to do a little bit more. So thank you, Holly. We are doing more on that. Written notice to parents, including notice of rights and procedural safeguards. Now there is a long paragraph of what a parent is. And so in that,
Yes, you don't have to read that.
I don't have to. Okay.
It's
I'm
in
just gonna
special ed rules. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'll know that we're going by the definition of that's in the special ed rules manual, and it is very long. So it encompasses a lot of different people that can be considered the parent.
And I think that probably the one important thing is that it is a person with whom the student lives or has parental, my mind just went blank, parental
Responsibilities.
Yes. Don't mind me. My brain's not working very well. So you want to make sure that you do provide those safeguards every time and that the parents understand them. I know that with OCR, that's one of the things that they look at to make sure that the parents do understand what those safeguards are. It's one thing to just give it to them, but it's another thing to make sure that they understand it. If it's parents that English is their second language, you want to make sure that they get that those safeguards in a language that they understand or have an interpreter that can interpret those.
And on our website, I do have a sample form. So I've got a lot of sample forms that you can use and adapt at your will. You can change whatever you want to do. I have a sample procedural safeguards that you could use. Well, it's notice of rights in special ed law, it's procedural safeguards. People kind of use them interchangeably, but the notice of rights on my website is also translated into Spanish if you wanted to use that.
I use it. I think it's great. All of Holly's forms are very simple and user-friendly. Parent consent before all initial evaluation. So that's really important. And it's really important that parents understand that it's consent that they're giving. I've had a couple parents go, I didn't know I was giving consent, or I don't think and I'm like, did they have you fill out a little form that you signed yes, that you're allowing them to do an evaluation? Oh yeah, well, that's your consent form. And so just having conversations with the parents and making sure that they understand what they're actually signing is huge. Team-based decision-making regarding an evaluation and placement of students is really important, as far as you don't want to be the 504 coordinator talking to the parent, making up the accommodations. That needs to have a team. And I always, my rule is a 3-person team, and it needs to be the parent. We should always try and include them because they know the student, but you also want the educators that know the student. You don't want somebody that's a teacher that doesn't even know the student or what accommodations they may need in the classroom. And then of course, the 504 coordinator who knows what services we can provide.
So the 3 requirements are individuals who are knowledgeable of the child, someone who knows how to interpret the data, and knows placement options. So those are requirements for your team members. That's not always going to be the LEA coordinator. You
Correct.
shouldn't be participating in all of these meetings. I know, Dory, you sometimes end up having to kind of serve as a mediator, clarifier, that kind of a thing. But your teams should be made up of those individuals that have those characteristics.
And I always make sure.
You notice I didn't say the parent.
Right.
So the parent has to consent to evaluate, but then that's it. Parent rights they change after that. They and I'm going to talk about what those rights are, but they don't necessarily have an explicit right to serve on the team, to consent for implementation of the plan, to consent of the plan. It's just to consent for evaluation is the only parental right, explicitly with involvement. So
Yeah, and that's really
Well-
confusing sometimes for parents.
it is. I think I have a slide about that, don't I?
I think so.
Yeah, I do. Okay, we'll cover that more.
Also, you want to make sure that they're disseminating the 504 plans. There's nothing more frustrating than for a teacher to go, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing that. So you're going to want to make sure I have all of my 504 coordinators in the district. They actually make sure that the parent or the teacher has a copy and then they sign off on it, because we just want to make sure that everybody's for sure getting it and everybody is knowledgeable of what that student's accommodation should be. Periodic reevaluations. Now, this one, it says every 3 years, but one thing I try and really make sure that all the 504 coordinators understand is if a parent comes in with some additional information saying, oh, we had them tested for X and now they qualify, they have this disability. We're wondering if maybe they need some accommodations. That's a time that you would definitely need to reevaluate because you have new information. Does it necessarily mean that they're going to get more accommodations? No, but you definitely want to look at that and you want to not just dismiss the parent and go, well, it's not been 3 years. Anytime that the student is transitioning, especially from like a lower grade to junior high or from junior high to high school, you're going to want to have those reevaluations to look at what that environment is going to require as far as the accommodations. We have in elementary school a lot of accommodations that have to deal with recess. They don't have recess in secondary, so you need to make sure that you're changing those. There's nothing more frustrating than looking at a junior high or a high school student that has a 504 plan that says recess in it.
But you have to do the evaluation based on the current placement. So you can't do it prior to them moving on to the next grade. So because they need to do that evaluation as the team that's offering the services, because it would not be a good idea to promise services and accommodations on a plan and then put that forward to the middle school or high school, and then they're stuck with this plan having to implement it until they can reevaluate. So make sure that they're in their current placement when you do that reeval. Right.
And the teachers are going to have some time to get to know that student, to know exactly what accommodations they need.
And that's more of a building level. You probably don't do this as much, do you, Dory?
Me?
With the reevaluations?
Mm-mm.
Since you're not really knowledgeable of the children mostly.
Mm-mm. No, I just make sure that they do them. Or
good.
They should look at them, I'm like, they're transitioning, make sure. So all of the, like I say, you should be reviewing the 504s as you go, but for sure, all incoming 7th graders, you need to be contacting those parents and talking to the teachers and seeing if there's anything that needs to be changed.
And see, these would be great things to put on a little checklist to say, are you fulfilling your child find responsibilities? Are you providing written notice to parents when you get their consent for evaluation? Are you getting their consent for evaluation? Are you reviewing, doing reevaluations, everything? Like, these are the kinds of things that we could put into a little checklist just as reminders for them in launching into the school year and just keeping on their radar. And then the manifestation determination requirements.
Yes.
Manifestation applies in section 504.
Yes, and you should be reviewing that whenever you have those discipline issues.
That's a big child find.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the slides in front of you. Do I have a specific child find?
I'm looking.
I have so many different PowerPoints.
Yes, you do have a specific one. It's in after this one.
Okay, I just don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, now it's you're going to talk about your LEA policies and procedures.
Yes. So on the
I wanted to get question. Should we answer that first, Sid, or is this one that we should wait a little bit? Answer it first. Okay, go for it.
Okay. Is parental consent required for reevaluations?
No. Once consent is given to evaluate a child for a disability under section 504, that is the only time you need to ask consent for evaluation, because you have established that this child has a disability. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but there's two parts to that you need to focus on for 504. One is the evaluation for the existence of a disability. Two is if they're substantially limited to the extent that they need. We established their substantial limitation, but then do they need accommodations? There's two separate parts. So once you've established that they qualify as a student with a disability, that's it. They always can qualify because of the three parts that are involved in eligibility. Anything else, Ed?
Nope, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to share some examples of how Davis School District provides the LEA policies and procedures. So if you look at the very bottom, it's kind of blurry and hard to see. In the first two slides, you're going to see that it says ADA and discrimination. So on every single page on our website, if you scroll to the bottom, you can click on that. And what shows up is the very last slide. Oops, I put my finger up there, sorry. The very last slide, which says accessibility and non-discrimination. And so if you scrolled down to the bottom of the non-discrimination policy, there's also a link there to where they can file a complaint. So it's very accessible. And I try to make sure that it's on every, I don't try to make sure this, it is on every school website as well. So they all have it on all of their websites. You just scroll to the bottom. So that's very accessible for all of the parents. And
I'm a stickler on this one, and you know this.
Mm-hmm.
If it takes me more than like 2 clicks, or if I can't go onto the search bar and find your grievance processes, just imagine a parent with a student with a disability, and this goes for Title IX, like any discrimination complaint. If they have to get on there and search and cannot find who to talk to about their concerns, that could be really frustrating. And I'm, this is my job, so I'm pretty savvy in trying to track down information. And sometimes I get on some websites and I cannot find who the 504 coordinator is or the Title IX coordinator. They need to be accessible to parents. And so I'm a big stickler on, they say like 2 clicks and you should be there. So the fact that you have that on your every page, it's just there at the bottom in a little link. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be, some big part of that page, but I approve of this message.
And then also on all of in our student handbooks, it's also a full page with everybody listed in there as well. So that makes it very easy for anybody to find. And I always try to make sure that everything is current and up to date, because we moved places this year. I moved to a different building and it wasn't up to date. So I had to make sure I hurried up and got a hold of them and said, change that, because they're not going to be able to find me.
Well, and part of your notice of rights to parents needs to be with the information of the 504 coordinator, specifically their mm-hmm. name and title and contact information. Yeah,
schools are always very happy to put my name down.
Same. That's all right. Yeah. I just think 504 takes a minute to get into, and then once you're in it, you're like kind of start to really get in the groove. And I actually enjoy working with Section 504. So I oversee Title IX and Title VI, and 504. I don't know. Maybe I've lost some screws in my head, but I just love it. I love working with Section 504. So child find, because this is why we do it. We're trying to find children who need services to access their education. And this is a legal requirement that I want coordinators to understand and to make sure that every educator in your LEA understands this requirement, because it's a legal obligation from all of us. it's in IDEA and Section 504 that we identify, locate, and evaluate all children who have disabilities and who may be entitled to special education services. So this is identify, locate, and evaluate. As a public school system, those are the extent for all children, all children. So that's why I say homeless children, private school children, homeschooled, I said homeless and homeschooled, right? We've got foster children, any child. What we need to be making sure that we're seeking those students out and offering them the evaluation, but we don't have to provide the services unless they enroll in our public school system. But we have to do that. We have to offer to evaluate them and identify if they are a student with a disability. And so what the obligation is for LEAs is that they put out an annual notice. And, you know, some of the ways it changes the ways that people do it. But they do, like, their policy manuals are updated every year, whatever they send out to parents. But some of them will put them in physicians' offices, homeless shelters, grocery stores. I mean, anywhere in the community that you, and do it in languages that people can understand, just to let them know, hey, as a public school system, we want to let you know that this is available to you. So that's what Child Find is. And so each educator has an obligation to be looking for these students and referring them for an evaluation. So this is a very important law to remind on an annual basis, a repeated basis with all of our educators, because there is not because it's something we need to do to support students. But at the very bottom, you know, floor level, there's a lot of case law out there where OCR will say, that's the Office for Civil Rights, will say, hello, you had all of these red flags, all these Child Find red flags, and you never referred, you never evaluated after all these months of seeing these signs. And so there's a ton of case law out there where people are not off the hook for not identifying these kids, where they've had plenty of information to suspect or believe that the student is substantially limited and has a disability. So any questions about Child Find? Okay, so here where we're talking about notice of rights. These are the basics, what have to be in your notice of rights or procedural safeguards. This is from OCR, this is what you have to have in there. So notice, so you need to provide notice that you are evaluating, if you're doing what placement, what accommodations related services that you're planning to provide. So you have to provide notice to parents. And then you have to give them the opportunity to review all relevant records and see. So these are where, since they don't have an explicit right to participate on the team or to approve the plan or to anything, they can appeal your decisions as a team. So they can appeal the team's decisions with an impartial hearing. And this needs to be provided from y'all. Y'all get to arrange it. Impartial hearing officer, you get to pay for it. I understand that they're not cheap, but that is their right to apply for an impartial hearing and have representation by counsel and a review procedure. So that's, and like I said, we've got a sample in English and Spanish of notice of rights if you wanted to use it. You want to add anything, Dory?
No, that I use your parental right, the procedural safeguard one for ours, and have that listed on my website so that they can get that.
Well, and procedural safeguards for special education are a lot more complicated and really long.
Mm-hmm.
OCR says you should keep it simple. It should be like one page, like we've got. They don't want it to be this big long dissertation for parents to have to understand. So keep it simple. Professional learning.
Okay, So you want to provide ongoing support and training. And like I said, I have that 4 times a year, once for anybody that wants a refresher or all new 504 coordinators. And then I have 3 others during the school year. And like I said, they're usually based on a lot of questions that I'm getting. Because like I said, I feel if one person has a question, there's more than likely more people that have questions. Making sure that all of the information's out on, I use Teams. I have everything posted. If I get something new, or if Holly sends out a new training, I will post it on there and say, here's some, things if you want to read it, or if you want to look at that to be more current on it. If you have questions, everything is always linked there in my team, so that they have one place that they need to go if they have questions, and then links to all of the other places that they can go for information. I do use a lot from Special Ed Connection and different articles that they have, and I will post those in there, because more than likely, if I have a question about it, they have a question about it with some of their students as well. And it really does provide some really simple, easy information. And they're usually like 1 or 2 pages long. So it's quick information to get the basics.
Well, and if you've not worked with Special Ed Connection, it's amazing. So you can get all your answers through Special Ed Connection, and they have forms and things, form samples. Your special education director should have it's free, it's paid for by the state. So your special ed director should have your unique password and username. And it takes a little getting used to knowing how to do searches and things on there. So I brought in someone from Special Ed Connection to do a training, and that is posted on my website with all the other trainings that can help you. A good place to start is Smart Starts. Like, if I were you, I'd like just take some time every once in a while, pull up your Smart Starts, and just see what's available to keep up on your information. But definitely look into Special Ed Connection.
The other thing that I did this year, this last year, it was the very first time I've ever done it. We sent out an email to all of the parents with students with 504s, and just said, we're going to provide a little bit of information one night. It's from this time to this time. If you'd like to sign up and let us know. I had about 130 parents who signed on, and I just kind of talked about basic, what a 504 was, their procedural safeguards, what they should expect from a school, what it might look like. And then I told them if they had specific questions that pertained to them and their student or their school, to just send me an email or give me a call. And I was able to field a lot of questions. I probably had 3 or 4 parents that were really struggling with their schools, and we were able to work together to preempt anything going wrong and making sure that the school understood what the parent was trying to get across, what they felt they needed, and to help the parent understand what by law they were able to get for their student. So that ended up being something really beneficial, and I would highly recommend that. I also teach the section in CHAD. There's one of the weeks that they do the training on IEPs and 504s, and I usually go in kind of between IEPs and 504s and what's expected. And so it's really a great way to give education to your parents.
Now I know I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
So don't worry about whatever answers, but how did you reach out to parents who might be multilingual learners? Did you provide any sort of, yes, how did we do that?
So I will be honest and say, I didn't actually send it out. We worked through our IT department, and they sent it out through, I don't know how they did it, but somebody else from special ed decided to do it for special ed. And they said, would you like to do that for 504? And I said, yes. So I'm not really sure. I know that it was sent out. It was probably sent out in Spanish as well, but I don't know that it was sent out to other languages, to be very honest.
Well, and I'm thinking more along the lines of having an interpreter available during the time. So if parents who are there need to have translation, so they understand what the presenter is talking about. I think YouTube's working on something where, or Google, or I think it's Google actually is working on something that will automatically translate as people are speaking, but like in closed captioning.
Yes.
I'm not sure. That would be awesome. But anyway, just because, like you said, it can be even more difficult for our parents who are multilingual learners who it's difficult to understand the system and the laws. I mean,
yeah,
we have a hard enough time understanding them, and we're educators.
Exactly. And then we also have a transition fair every year for our district. And I like to be there so that I can explain some of the transitions for the parents who are having their students getting ready to graduate, kind of what to expect as they're aging out of high school and going into knowing what types of what's out there for jobs, what's out there, what kind of accommodations they can get at post-high school education facilities and different things like that. So those are some, and we do actually have interpreters there for that. So good for us on that. I'll have to work on the other one. I'll do better. And then as far as advise the district superintendent and charter director or school governing boarding requiring the status of LEA compliance with Section 4, I haven't really had to do a lot of that. I do read through our policy and ask questions and things that I want to make sure that our policy matches up with what is actually required, because I think sometimes they're a little more particular about some things. And so anyways, we talk about that. I make sure that if there is a complaint, that our superintendents know exactly what's going on. So that way, when they're fielding those calls and stuff, they know that we're covering it. But other than that, I don't really go to the board.
Well, and a lot of you might be new and don't know the requirement from about 3 years back now, where you had to report your expenditures, and the legislature, the Utah legislature, was toying with the idea of providing funding for 504. And then that, because it is an unfunded mandate. And so then they decided not to do that anymore. So I think communicating to your board and your superintendents, the people who are preparing the budgets and deciding where to put money, if you're telling them, here are the numbers of 504, that we have, here are our expenditures. If you wanted to bring that information to your local board who is determining where to put money, you might be able to provide a compelling argument to start planning, more into the budget, some of these accommodations or related services that are being required, because we all know 504 is just getting bigger and bigger. I don't have the stats in front of me as far as how many complaints to the Office for Civil Rights have increased over the years, but it's blown up. So Sid.
Okay, so this question is, will you go over how to qualify a student for a 504? Is there a checklist for what should be included in the evaluation?
I will. What do I have on the docket there, Dory?
I'm looking. You have eligibility requirement.
Okay, well, is that next?
First there's participation in team meetings and then eligibility requirement.
Oh, it's right here.
Oh,
good
okay.
timing. Okay, read the question to me over again, though.
Okay, will do. Will you go over how to qualify a student for a 504? Is there a checklist for what should be included in the evaluation?
Okay, so when you ask if there's what's required from the federal angle, it's about 2 sentences. So here you go. But we'll talk a little bit more about what could be included, but they're not very explicit. So I've tried to provide some structure for you, but the definition, this is the only thing that the team needs to establish. When you get a referral and you've got consent to evaluate, you need to determine if one, the student has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. which includes major bodily functions. And on my fundamentals webinar, I go more into what are major life activities, what are major bodily functions, but the overall message with this is that in 504, under IDEA, you need to show educational impact. Under 504, you do not. So it needs to be, is there a substantial limitation of one or more major life activities? So these are like breathing, sleeping, communicating, eating. Learning is one, learning, concentrating, things like that. Those are a couple that kind of are related to your, educational performance, but it's just a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And there's no definition of substantial limitations. It's just that a reasonable person determines that this is substantially limiting a person to the fact that the point that they need supports to access FAPE. And then two, if they have a record of such an impairment, that would be, did they have a prior IEP? Did they have a 504 plan previously? Did they have, so do they have a record of that? And are they regarded as having such an impairment? So this would be more along the discrimination lines where people are treating them as if they have a disability. So okay, and so here's, I want to drive home something that is very misunderstood with 504. And that is that there's really, if you've got to think of it as part A and part B. So this is a non-discrimination law. And there are provisions of non-discrimination I'm going to cover in this next slide. You guys sneak peek. But so the first thing is identifying that student. So you're going to get consent for evaluation. So someone made a referral, consent for evaluation. You're going to gather your data, and data, there's no definition of what that is, but some recommendations would be attendance records, grades, if you have a doctor's, some kind of healthcare provider or therapist, not a requirement, mind you, you need to get out there and dispel that myth that diagnoses are required for eligibility. No. Then things like, but if they have it, great. If you want to do some sort of an assessment, if that's available to you by someone who is trained in that assessment, you can do that. Classroom observations, parent observations, you gather whatever you have. And then you meet together as a team and you sift through all of that. And then you say, based on all this data that we have, does this student meet the definition of a substantial limitation in one or more of these major life activities? Not do they have this specific disability, but are they limited in one or more of these major life activities or major bodily functions? That is how you make the determination. That's step one. So that's part A. You say yes, then you're like, okay. Now you say, are there accommodations? So this child meets the definition of a child with a disability. Now you say, does this child need a plan to provide for accommodations or related services that would provide them access to their education? They might not. At the time, let's take, for instance, because you all should hopefully know that you can't take into account mitigating measures in order to make that determination. So things like medication or, so if medication is mitigating the ameliorative effects of asthma for a student, which would be substantially limiting in the major life activity of breathing, if they were not medicated, but so you've met, they meet the eligibility requirement as having a disability because they have asthma. If they did not have that inhaler, they would not be able to participate in certain programs and activities in education. So they meet the definition of disability, but because this is where you can take into account that they have that medication, if they're functioning in school with that medication, then they might not need an accommodation plan. So they meet the definition of a student with disability, but now you made that determination, like without the medication, they meet the definition, but with the medication, they don't need accommodations because they're functioning fine. But maybe this person with asthma, this student with asthma, does need accommodation in their physical education classes or on the soccer team or those kinds of things, and they might need a plan. So technical eligibility means this student who is technically eligible based on one of those three criteria, but does not require an accommodation plan or related services. But what they do get, all students, this includes students who have an individualized education program, all students are covered under the general non-discrimination provisions, which means that they have access, physical program and physical accessibility requirements, protection against retaliation and harassment, reasonable modification if needed and related to the past disability, and the procedural safeguards. So those rights that we've noted. So all students who qualify do have access to these non-discrimination provisions. That's a lot of information, but this is something it's not well understood, that identification piece is number one. It doesn't always include a plan. Sid?
Hi there. So we just have one question right now. Someone is asking, is a parent's opinion sufficient record of an impairment?
A parent's opinion is data. So anybody's opinion is data, but the team's going to determine how valid it is, well, not how valid it is, but how meaningful it is in determining whether or not a student has a disability. So any parental observations, that's the thing too, is you get consent to evaluate. If you don't invite the parent to be on the team, which I don't recommend, in very rare circumstances would I recommend not having a parent on the 504 team because they are the most knowledgeable of the child. There are some circumstances in case law where parents have impeded the process so much, either they would not attend the meeting after repeated attempts, or when they come in, they just are disruptive and argumentative and not productive in making sure that we are providing access for their child in their education. But most of the time you need to involve the parents. But if not, you have to consider any of the information that they've given you. So whether it's their opinion, some kind of documentation from a healthcare provider, you have to consider it when you do the evaluation. I don't know if I've posted a form online, but as far as the question, if there's like a checklist, and Dory, I don't know if you use one. I don't know if I have a checklist that kind of can help a team. I think I do. And I don't know, Sid, maybe you can make a note for me, some of the things we talked about, because I'm always happy to put resources together, but I have seen on Special Ed Connection sort of a basic team meeting structure that can help you to just have a checklist because it's not like an IEP meeting where it's like, you have to do it like this. It's not like that. Did you want to add anything to that long diatribe?
I was just going to say, we need to make sure that they understand that RTI cannot prevent them from implementing a 504 plan. So a lot of times there's that confusion, like with special ed, you have to have RTI, where in 504 you don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good place here to make that point, because there is this impression out there that you need to do interventions. The wait and see approach is highly discouraged from OCR. If you have reasonable suspicion or to believe or suspect that a child has a disability, then go ahead and start the evaluation, get consent and start the evaluation process. You can do interventions while you're gathering data, and that can provide you with some more data because you have 45 school days to complete an evaluation. So gather your data, do some interventions while you're in the process. Just don't wait too long. And I will say, you know, I get the question a lot about, well, how much data is enough? And I will say there was a Dear Colleague letter from on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that basically don't set your threshold so high. They don't want you to spend like an exhaustive amount of time determining if a child is eligible under the definition of a student with a disability. I mean, when it comes down to it, you'll need to spend more time looking at if there needs to be accommodations. But as far as meeting that term of eligibility, they don't want you to just spend a lot of time on that. Because sometimes teams will just be like, well, we got to do this test, we got to do that test, and we got to do, you know, and that can just really stall the process of a student who just needs to be identified and have those non-discrimination provisions at least. So there's a basic overview that I've discussed. Did I leave anything out? We've got our child find, we've got our referral, our consent. We get our team together. These are people who are knowledgeable of the child, know how to interpret the data, and know what placement options are available. We get all our data, we have an evaluation meeting, we review the data, we determine eligibility, and then develop the plan if needed. And then we implement it. And no, I get the question all the time, do I need to have parent permission to implement the plan? No. But they need to know that they have a right to appeal if they, and request a hearing and request another meeting if they don't like the plan. And then periodically reevaluate. Now, reevaluate is, I would say review and reevaluate. Annually is recommended, but not a reevaluation. I would say a review of the plan would be annually recommended to see, like, let's do a quick review. Let's see if this child might need to make some changes, but not a reevaluation per se as a change of placement that Dory was talking about. If there's a change of placement, though, then you should do a reevaluation and see kind of more major overhaul. And you can do amendments, by the way. I've got an amendment form online that you can use. If throughout the year you just need to do some minor adjustments to a plan, you can just do an agreement as a team, write up amendments and attach it to the plan. It doesn't have to be a major overhaul of the plan. Okay, Dory.
All right. Now, for some reason, there was a jackhammer just a few minutes ago going on right outside my window. So I'm hoping that it doesn't come back. So your role is to make sure that you respond to students and parents and staff and administrators when there's a problem. You want to inform the LEA of a complaint and what the procedures are. You want to assist the individuals with filing complaints. So a lot of times I'll get phone calls and I will explain the process to the parents. I try and make sure that we include the principal, that make sure they've gone to the school and really expressed what's going on. Sometimes they prefer that I kind of am the go-between between the two, and I kind of talk to the school and then kind of give the school a heads up of what the concerns are, and then they contact the parent, and then they can usually work it out. But I always follow up with that parent and say, I know that you had this issue. I'm just following up to make sure that you feel like this has been addressed. And if not, here's what you do. And we go through what the due process hearing and the complaints looks like. Oh, there's a question. Should I answer it now or should I keep going?
Why don't you go ahead and go through the slide and then we'll go back to Sid.
Okay. You want to, when somebody comes to me, I investigate the concerns. And I make sure that, like, I look step by step. So what exactly are they upset about? Were they not included? Did they feel like the 504 plan wasn't being implemented? And so then what I do is I go back to the school and I talk to the school, we talk to the teachers, we look at how they're implementing it. I've really encouraged all of the teachers to document it in some way when they're providing those interventions or those accommodations. So if it's they get extended time on the test, I make sure that they write it down. And if the student didn't take it, I have them write it down that they didn't take the additional time, that they didn't need it. So that way, when the parent comes back and says, well, this person didn't get the extra time. The student did not, I asked them when they turned in their paper if they needed more time, they did not need it. And I have the teachers anecdoted. So that makes it really easy for them to be able to have that data when the parent comes back and says, they're not getting it. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, sometimes kids don't want to take those accommodations. We still have to provide them. And if they're not taking them, then we need to notify the parents that the students are not taking full access of those accommodations. Because
and I do have a form. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that sometimes the parents are just assuming that the kids are that they're getting them, and teachers are assuming that the kids are letting their parent know that they aren't doing it. So there's that mixed communication. So we just always want to make sure that if students aren't using those accommodations, that parents are notified. And if we need to make some amending to the 504, we do that. Go ahead, Holly.
And then I have a form that I put together this was a request of an LEA for just a simple form where a teacher can write up what the accommodations are, and then it's just got the days of the week. So it's a fillable form too if they want, so they can just be like, okay, Johnny used this Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then so you have that documentation so that this can help them, because it's important that they document it for protecting both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Should we ask Sid what's
yeah.
This is good time, Sid?
Yes, yeah. So this is going back to who should be on the team.
Okay.
So this question says, at a high school level, is it permissible for the student to participate as a part of the team?
It is encouraged for the student to be part of the team. Once we get into middle school, high school, they have a lot of knowledge to contribute. So I would encourage that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to go back to the investigating concerns. You want to make sure that you're following your LEA procedural safeguards. Like, I was very surprised that, or just even your policy, that's what I meant to say. When you follow your policy, I was surprised at how many 504 coordinators didn't really know what our policy was and what it looked like. And I said, because I would say, review your policy. And my assumption is they're going to review the policy. Well, they didn't. And so I had to make up a quiz that basically asked all of the questions, and then they had to take it. So that way I was aware of who actually understood it. And it also gave them the opportunity to read it and make sure they understood what our policy is as far as 504 and what we're requiring, because 504 is broad. They do have some deadlines, but our district has additional deadlines on top of that. For corrective action, when it's appropriate, when I do my investigations, I will have recommendations for if there are teachers involved that or administrators that need some corrective action, or maybe additional training, things like that. I put that in my report. The parents also receive a copy of that report so they know what's going on. I also explain to them in that once I've done my investigation that they have a right to disagree with what my findings are and be able to have that impartial hearing and all of that. I have never actually had a parent actually do that. They just kind of circumvent me and just go straight to OCR. They choose not to do investigation that way. So they usually what happens is they will file a grievance with OCR. But I always make sure that that's something I tell them. I'm like, I can investigate it, or you can go through OCR. I'm not sure how quick OCR will get it done, but I have this many days to get it done. And I kind of walk them through the process. You need to make sure that you organize and maintain your records for all Section 504 and disability discrimination complaints, including all formal and informal complaints. So I have mine kind of color coded. The more informal ones are in one color, the formal ones are in another color. And we have to keep those in our district for 3 years. So then in 3 years, I take them and I make sure that they get shredded. But it can be time consuming, and you want to make sure that you take copious notes. I have had a couple cases go to OCR where they have been very in depth and asked for very specific things. And that can get kind of scary because you're like, oh my gosh, did I have it all? Fortunately, I have special ed and counseling background. So I've documented my whole career, which has really been very beneficial in this position.
Well, and I've been asked a lot, how long do you have to keep records? And there is of course nothing in the regulations, but we always recommend that you go with special education rules and keep them for at least 3 years. We're going to talk about OCR now, aren't we?
Yeah.
So one thing that people don't understand about the Office for Civil Rights is that they don't just do formal investigations, but they do have option for a early complaint resolution or a facilitated resolution between the parties, kind of like a mediation. So my role at the Utah State Board of Education is not to do investigations. Special education has a whole due process option, but my role is more technical assistance and advisory role for you as LEAs and for parents, just clarification, knowing what your rights are. And so this is something that I always make sure that LEAs, schools, stakeholders know that there are multiple options with the Office for Civil Rights if they do decide to go that direction, that they're not satisfied with the resolutions at the local level, that they do just have a mediation option available as well, so they don't have to open up a whole entire investigation.
Okay, so do you want to do this, or I can?
Sure. So any person can file a complaint. So it doesn't need to be someone who has a student in a school or an educator. Anyone can file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. It needs to be filed within 180 days. They do have an extension appeal, 180 days of the last act of discrimination. So it could have been something that was repeated over time, but they go 180 days from the last act. Mediation, this is what I just spoke about, and they are also bound by Family Educational Rights Privacy Act. So they're not going to, if you see some of the resolutions out there that they post, they don't use the name of the person who was the recipient of the discrimination, of the alleged discrimination. So they do keep all of that information private. And the complaint is so Dory and they have their process that they go through, but the person that's going through that process does not have to wait to file with OCR. And I have a link to the case processing manual if you wanted to look more in depth into how they roll.
And here's a list of kind of some things that when I've been working with them, these are some of the things that they've requested to be able to kind of look and see that we followed our policies and the law. So a copy of the 504 plan, that's the most current. Sometimes they'll ask for your email or your phone logs, statements from teachers and staff regarding that 504 and how it was implemented. And that's why I continuously say, make sure you document. Copy of the district policies and procedures is what they'll ask for, because they're going to look at what you've done in your timeline and to see if you're following what your policy says. And so like one thing that I always try and remember to do is if a parent asks for something specific, how did we respond? And that's kind of what they do when they ask for your information. They'll say, well, the parent said they contacted you at this point and they wanted this. What did you do? And so in your timeline, it's going to be, they asked for this, you did this. They asked for this, you did this. And then a summary of response to the parent's claim. So if the parent's saying, well, they didn't implement the 504 with fidelity. So you're going to say, well, this is what we did. And this is the documentation that we have to support that. Or they'll say, I was never included. And then you have copies of the emails and the dates that say when they were notified and what you talked to them about. And I'm always telling all of the 504 coordinators, just make sure you document. I have a phone log that I keep everything in. I write down the date, what the basic idea of it is. And so that way I may not have room for all of everything, the whole conversation, but I at least know what it was basically about. So then when somebody asks me, I can go, oh yeah, let me look. Oh, I did talk to that parent back in May and this is what they said. And, or parents will forget that they talked to me and they'll call in and they say, I've not talked to anybody and nobody will help me. And I say, oh, well, actually I spoke with you back at this time on this day. And it's been very helpful to be able to track the things that I've done or the things that the school has done. And so that's one of the major things that I always say, make sure you document.
Yeah, it's like 504 real estate, document, document, document. Like they don't even have any requirements under 504 as far as what documentation you need to include, except for the data, the evidence that you use to evaluate a student. There's nothing else. They don't say that you have to write a plan. They don't say anything. And so I just always say, if someone asks, do I need to document this? I would say, yes. It's not necessarily the law, but yes, document everything. Because then, they don't tell you what you have to document. And then they come in and they're like, Dory, we need to see this and this and this documentation. So just document everything.
Just have it.
Yes. And everyone has their own organizational methods. OCR is not going to come in and ask me about documentation, but I like to keep things organized. I've created my own little Google form that has all the information. And so then that form goes to a spreadsheet and then I can keep track that way. That's the system I've made for myself. Okay, so these are just some of the forms that we've put online. I'm going to be adding some more manifestation determination. I went to a training this summer. They had some forms that I'm going to add, but these are some that we have online that you can use. Download, they're all fillable. There's a space at the top. You can put your own LEA name. I really don't need credit for it. Just use them if they help you. And then some of these things that we've talked about today, then I might just keep adding more of what you need. So that's what I'm here for. And Dory added a couple of things. She shared a couple of things with me that I'll send out on the listserv after this training. We've got just a time check for you, Dory. We've got 7 minutes.
Oh boy. Okay.
So, well, we're doing all right. But okay. I do want people to be able to ask questions, but just part of our role is just eliminating barriers for students in access to education. This is their right to be able to participate in all school programs, educational programs and activities, and for us to, if appropriate, and then for us to make that happen for them. So just participating in the development and implementation of the process to review data, let's look at your data, see see what our students with disabilities, how are, are they disproportionately excluded from certain activities? So just looking at your data so that we can try to distinguish if there are certain things that need to be done to remove those barriers. And then monitoring your school programs and activities, making sure that there aren't barriers. So for instance, for students who have a disability that want to participate, there's a conversation at the board meeting about honors courses. Well, they might need special accommodations, and this is more like going along with special education, but they might not be so great at math. And their dyscalculia, makes it so it's difficult for them, but yet they might really excel in English and be able to take honors courses. So making sure that we don't have unnecessary barriers for our students with disabilities to participate. And I think we covered a lot of the building administrator type roles. So just you want a brief run through of what we've talked about for the building coordinators. Yes, that are not legally required.
Right. But you want to have, you want to coordinate referrals if you have that opportunity, to make sure that they're following through doing child find, determining appropriate section 504 teen composition, facilitating the evaluations and the development of the plan, providing notices and documenting parent consent, like I said, distributing those 504 plans. That's one thing you definitely need to make sure that you do.
And get a signature. I suggest getting a signature.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Nobody can say they didn't get it. No,
exactly.
The parents can't say they didn't have a copy of my plan. The teacher can't say, I didn't know they had a plan. Get a signature.
Definitely.
Or some kind of email saying, okay, got it. Thank you.
I have some of the building coordinators send out an email that says, please review your 504 plans. Once you've done that, send me an email back saying that you've done that. And then they keep that on file. And then when that teacher says, well, I didn't know, they can go, oh, but you said on this day. It's just a really good way to kind of push that responsibility of the teachers to be able to do that. They get distracted. When they know that there's I can't even think of the word, but where they've said, yes, I've done it, then they do it. Making sure that you schedule the annual reviews somehow. With COVID and everything, we had a lot of the 504 coordinators just sending emails out to the parents with a copy of the 504 saying, this is what we've done this year. What are your thoughts? And most of the parents wrote back and said, I think everything's great. We had a few that we had to meet with. And then scheduled those periodic reevaluations when students are moving into those, definitely the different environments. Oh, this is me too. So you want to maintain your records and keep documentation. I mean, like if you learn nothing else from this, document. Assure that the 504 plan moves with the student to the next grade level or to the new school. I had issues with this because a lot of times they have dead files or inactive files. Those still need to be moving with that student. Coordinating the training with your building staff, making sure that all of your teachers and your staff understand what their requirements are for 504. And what that looks like. Conducting manifestation determinations when they're required, especially with discipline. Where our district, they have to tell me when a student with 504 has been disciplined, and I just kind of talk with them about the manifestation determination. You are a daily resource, and I tend to be a daily resource, like for our building coordinators. A lot of times they're calling me and then giving out that information afterwards. And you're the liaison between the school building and the district staff. And you should be attending your periodic LEA and USBE Section 504 trainings.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I get here because we've got 1 minute so that y'all can take a screenshot, take a picture of this, so that if you want that credit, I'm going to send this out through I'm going to send the Google Link form out through the listserv. So if you want to join the listserv, or you can send me an email, or you can just go straight to that Google form. You should be able to open it up. So I wanted you to have that before we close. Jerry, are they just going to kick us off of YouTube?
No, you got
Oh.
all you need.
Okay, so so then those that need to hop off right now, you're welcome to hop off. It is now 3:30. But Dory, do you have a second to stay online in case people have questions that they want to hang on and ask us a few questions? Okay, so if you got to hop off, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. I'm here for you. If you need me to help answer any questions, please contact me. And I hope you have a great year. This won't be the last time you hear from me. So, but I appreciate you. So have a great day. And we're here if you want to ask any questions, just put them in the YouTube chat.